Indriya karmani prana karmani chapare atma samyama yogagno dhruati jnana deepite. Translation: those who are interested in self-realization in terms of mind and sense control offer the functions of all the senses as well as the vital force, breath, as oblations into the fire of the controlled mind. Text 28. Dravya yagna stapo yagna yoga yagna tathapare svadhyaya jnana yagnascha yataya sanghishita vrataha. Translation: there are others who, enlightened by sacrificing their material possessions in severe austerities, take strict vows and practice the yoga of eightfold mysticism. And others study the Vedas, the advancement of transcendental knowledge. Text 29. Apane juvati pranam prane panam tathapare pranapana gati rudhva pranayam parayanaha apare niyatahara pranan prane shuruvati. Translation: and there are even others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain in trance, and they practice stopping the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming, and incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. Some of them, curtailing the eating process, offer the outgoing breath into itself as a sacrifice. Text 30. Sarve pyete yagna vido yagna kshapita kalmashaha yagna shishtamrita bhujo yandi brahma sanatanam. Translation: all these performers who know the meaning of sacrifice become cleansed of sinful reaction, and, having tasted the nectar of the remnants of such sacrifice, they go to the supreme eternal atmosphere. Text 31. Nayam lokostvaya yagyasya kutonya guru sattama. Translation: O best of the Kuru dynasty, without sacrifice, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life. What then of the next? Text 32. Evam bahuvidha yagya vittata brahmano mukhe karmajan vidhi tan sarvan evam gyatva vimokshase. Translation: all these different types of sacrifice are approved by the Vedas, and all of them are born of different types of work. Knowing them as such, you will become liberated. Text 33. Sheyandra yamayad yagyaj jnana yagna parantapa sarvam karman kilam bharata yagnane parisamapyate. Translation: O chastiser of the enemy, the sacrifice of knowledge is greater than the sacrifice of material possessions. O son of Pritha, after all, the sacrifice of work culminates in transcendental knowledge. Text 34. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. Translation: just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. Okay. So that concludes the recitation. Now we'll turn back to chapter 4, text 24. And we'll read the translation and purport. Translation. A person who is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness is sure to attain the spiritual kingdom because of his full contribution to spiritual activities, in which the consummation is absolute and that which is offered is of the same spiritual nature. Purport. How activities in Krishna consciousness can lead one ultimately to the spiritual goal is described here. There are various activities in Krishna consciousness, and all of them will be described in the following verses. But for the present, just the principle of Krishna consciousness is described. A conditioned soul, entangled in material contamination, is sure to act in the material atmosphere. And yet he has to get out of such an environment. The process by which the conditioned soul can get out of the material atmosphere is Krishna consciousness. For example, a patient who is suffering from a disorder of the bowels due to overindulgence in milk products is cured by another milk product, namely curds. The materially absorbed conditioned soul can be cured by Krishna consciousness, as set forth here in the Gita. This process is generally known as yajna, or activities, sacrifices, simply meant for the satisfaction of Vishnu or Krishna. The more the activities of the material world are performed in Krishna consciousness, or for Vishnu only, the more the atmosphere becomes spiritualized by complete absorption. Brahman means spiritual. The Lord is spiritual, and the rays of his transcendental body are called Brahma Jyoti, his spiritual effulgence. Everything that exists is situated in that Brahma Jyoti. But when the Jyoti is covered by illusion, Maya, or sense gratification, it is called material. This material veil can be removed at once by Krishna consciousness. Thus, the offering for the sake of Krishna consciousness, the consuming agent of such an offering or contribution, the process of consumption, the contributor, and the result are all combined together, Brahman, or the absolute truth. The absolute truth covered by Maya is called matter. Matter dovetailed for the cause of the absolute truth regains its spiritual quality. Krishna consciousness is the process of converting the illusory consciousness into Brahman, or the Supreme. When the mind is fully absorbed in Krishna consciousness, it is said to be in samadhi, or trance. Anything done in such transcendental consciousness is called yajna, or sacrifice for the absolute. In that condition of spiritual consciousness, the contributor, the contribution, the consumption, the performer or leader of the performance, and the result or ultimate gain, everything becomes one in the absolute, the Supreme Brahman. That is the method of Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada is describing that in this verse, Krishna is discussing the principle of Krishna consciousness and how by acting in a transcendental consciousness, even within this material world, one can become spiritualized, attain the supreme spiritual kingdom, and spiritualize everything else, essentially making this place also the same spiritual quality. So the principle here is discussed. Then Krishna will describe, we heard, different processes that the Krishna conscious devotee or the bhakti yogi actually engages in. So we can read on, but essentially Prabhupada touches here that the essential situation to understand is that we ourselves are eternally spiritual beings, right? And that means that we're conditioned in the current status, because instead of experiencing our real nature as Satchit Ananda, or eternity, knowledge, and bliss, we're experiencing limitations. We're experiencing death. Time is ticking, right? And we're experiencing anxieties, and we're experiencing confusion, some lack of information, some illusion, some imperfect process of knowledge. That's what we're experiencing, where the right decision in life is not always immediately available. There's some guesswork that we're doing, or more or less, we're not able to navigate ourselves perfectly towards being always happy, which is our tendency as living beings. And you can see that tendency is, you can see the same tendency to be happy, to be free, to be joyful is found within all the living entities, within all the living beings, not just the human society. So that observation of the material world, an intelligent scientific person considers, okay, there must also be a soul within that body of that squirrel, because he's doing everything he possibly can to be happy too, just like I am. Right? So then at least we consider that there's if there's life within the body, then there's a soul within the body. Right? So all of us are conditioned. And now the tree, or the soul within the tree body, is much more conditioned, meaning that, and Krishna speaks one verse in the Bhagavad Gita where he discusses that each soul is conditioned by varying degrees. One is like a fire which is covered by smoke. Right? The smoke is always there covering the fire, actually. Sometimes you can't perceive it, but if you ever have been at a campfire and you have flashlights that you're using, or a lamp, like a big lamp that you're using, as well as with the fire, you can't perceive the smoke so much. But as soon as you turn off the lights, you'll see there's a lot of smoke. Right? So the fire is always accompanied with smoke. So that's one example of a certain amount of conditioning on each living entity. Then there's another example, which is that there's a embryo within the womb, which means he's completely encapsulated. So that's like the tree. There's also a soul there, and he's also Brahman. He's also always trying to be happy and satisfied, because that's who he is. That's his birthright, Satchit Ananda. But his consciousness, he's conditioned in a very extreme way. So we're lucky, because our conditioning in this human life is the minimal covering on the soul in comparison to all the other life forms, in terms of all the other 800 million species of life. It's discussed in some of the Vedas that there's 8,400,000 species of life, and 400,000 include different degrees of humans, including demigods, which are at the top of that list, but also those of us that live on the earth planet, right? We're also humans, and there's civilized humans, and there's also uncivilized humans, so forth. These are all different species according to the Shastra, but we're all in that category, 400,000 varieties of humans. So we're meant to take advantage of this opportunity and what? Learn the process of yajna, sacrifice. So what does that mean? That means we learn about the Lord, we learn about his supreme dominion, we learn about how to actually do things which are pleasing to that person, to yajna. Yajna is a name for sacrifice. It's also a name for Vishnu. So we learn that process. How do we please him? What can we do? In this age of Kali Yuga, we can chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, Sankirtana, that this is the yajna for this age. Also, glorification of the Lord's qualities and spreading of his message in Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. This is also Sankirtan. So we do that together. We're doing it now. We're participating now in the process. So in this human form of life, we have the opportunity to perform sacrifice. Whereas in these other forms of life, there's no opportunity. But what's amazing is that in the human form of life, we can give them an opportunity to do yajna, even if they didn't want to do it. That's called a Gyata Sukriti. Sukriti is that which will help one attain the spiritual elevation. Right? A Gyata Sukriti means without knowledge. What's amazing is when we take a flower and we offer it in sacrifice to Lord Vishnu, to Krishna, or to Krishna's representative, meaning the bona fide spiritual master who comes in the parampara, right? So we take our flower, we also offer Srila Prabhupada, right? And whatever he receives, he gives to his Guru Maharaj, right? And then he gives to his Guru Maharaj, and he gives to his Guru Maharaj, like that. And all of that is just to please Krishna, actually. So we offer to Krishna's representative in order to please him. Just like there's a word in English called a viceroy. A viceroy is a term which refers to the representative of the royal king, right? So if you're in a state and the viceroy comes to your state as a representative of the king, you're meant to offer him all the respect that you would normally offer the king, but he's busy, right? King is busy doing his business, but he sent the viceroy. And if we offer him all the pleasantries, all the etiquettes, all the opulence, all the pomp and festivities that we would normally offer to the king, if we offer it to the viceroy, he will report to the king very easily, and we'll become favored by the king. So that's the method. We're meant to learn the process of yajna through the bona fide spiritual master, and we offer through the spiritual master. So that will be discussed, and Krishna goes to that point. Text 34, he mentions that there at the end. So let's read a few more topics here because there's really some nice points. Okay, so text 25, translation. Some yogis perfectly worship the demigods by offering different sacrifices to them, and some of them offer sacrifices in the fire of the Supreme Brahman. Purport. As described above, a person engaged in discharging duties in Krishna consciousness is also called a perfect yogi or a first-class mystic. But there are others also who perform similar sacrifices in the worship of demigods, and still others who sacrifice to the Supreme Brahman or the impersonal feature of the Supreme Lord. There are different kinds of sacrifices in terms of different categories. Such different categories of sacrifice by different types of performers only superficially demark varieties of sacrifices. Sacrifice. Factual sacrifice means to satisfy the Supreme Lord Vishnu, who is also known as yajna. All the different varieties of sacrifice can be placed within two primary divisions, namely sacrifice of worldly possessions and sacrifice in pursuit of transcendental knowledge. Those who are in Krishna consciousness sacrifice all material possessions for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, while others who want some temporary material happiness sacrifice their material possessions to satisfy demigods such as Indra, the sun god, etc. And others who are impersonalists sacrifice their identity by merging into the existence of the of impersonal Brahman. The demigods are powerful living entities appointed by the Supreme Lord for the maintenance and lighting of the universe. Oh, pardon me. Maintenance and supervision of all material functions like the heating, watering, and lighting of the universe. Those who are interested in material benefits worship the demigods by various sacrifices according to the Vedic rituals. They are called Bhavishwaravadi, or believers in many gods. But others who worship the impersonal feature of the absolute truth are regarded and regard the forms of the demigods as temporary, sacrifice their individual selves in the supreme fire, and thus end their individual existences. By merging into the existence, by merging into the existence of the Supreme, such impersonalists spend their time in philosophical speculation to understand the transcendental nature of the Supreme. In other words, the fruit of workers sacrifice their material possessions for material enjoyment, whereas the impersonalist sacrifices his material designations with a view of merging into the existence of the Supreme. For the impersonalist, the fire altar of sacrifice is the Supreme Brahman, and the offering is the self being consumed by the fire of Brahman. The Krishna conscious person, like Arjuna, however, sacrifices everything for the satisfaction of Krishna. And thus all his material possessions, as well as his own self, everything is sacrificed for Krishna. Thus he is the first class yogi, but he does not lose his individual existence. So this was very technical, actually, but very essential. We are meant to understand that there are different degrees of spiritual activity, right? And essentially, there's also activities which are on the materialistic platform. And it's a type of a sacrifice, right? But it becomes transcendental whenever it's aimed at the pleasure of Lord Vishnu. So Prabhupada basically describes that real sacrifice includes satisfaction of Vishnu, of Krishna, right? And actually, if you see the Vedic rituals for worship of the different demigods, you will see that included in that ritual is worship of the Shalagram Shila. If you want to do it properly, you'll see that you actually have to worship Lord Vishnu in that deity form as the Shalagram Shila in order for the performance of that yajna to actually work. In this age of Kali Yuga, though, our brahmanas are not so perfect at understanding the Vedic sacrifices, and the mantra chanting is a little bit imperfect. Also, the purity of the articles are also not so, top notch. Where can we find uncontaminated grains? Where can we find clean, properly clean cloth? Where can we make a place which is completely purified, a sanctified place to perform the yajna? Actually, in this age of Kali, we can understand it's not possible in the formal sense. And actually, there's descriptions in the Vedic literature that describe that if there is some animal slaughter happening in some place, then that whole area is actually more or less contaminated. So we can see now the culture of the Brahminical culture has been more or less lost, because all pervading are activities which are impure. So that actually is a pollution of the whole atmosphere. It's a very widespread pollution, and that's the real pollution that we should have on our radar, We know that there's air pollution. Ozone is too high today, right? We have the alert, on the weather. It says the ozone is too high. Or we understand that there's this, you know, problem with the polluting the ocean with the plastic and all those things are there. But what we can understand is those are symptoms of a pollution of consciousness, right? Those are all symptoms of pollution of consciousness. So we should understand what is the root. The root is that we're not performing sacrifice for the satisfaction of Vishnu. We're performing activities. We're doing austerities. We're spending our energy. We're working very hard, spending time, money, resources, intelligence, organization, so many things, simply to meet the demands of the body in a more sophisticated way, according to our perspective, right? So some visionaries, you could say, amongst the human society have determined what is progressive, right? And what does it mean to be sophisticated? And now we're running very fast after those ideals, trendsetters. This is actually in the mode of passion. When we're in the mode of passion, conditioned living entities are in the mode of passion. We worship or we try to satisfy persons who are actually living impurely. Our attraction is to somebody who's actually living impure lifestyle. This is very interesting. And this has happened. This is happening to all of us. We're finding nice role models and idols and heroes in the material sphere who are more or less living impure lives according to the Vedic scheme. Right? Now, what's amazing about this is that the devotee, he doesn't bother with trying to, have a certain quantity for Krishna. Because he knows from the Ishopanishad. Srila Upanishad is a very important text. Srila Prabhupada translated that very early in his his writing career comparatively. And he provided that for the devotees. The Ishopanishad is so wonderful. Isha means the controller, right? Or the master. Isha, Ishvara, right? Controller. That's what, and Parameshvara, right? The Param Ishvara makes Parameshvara. That means Vishnu within the heart. He is the supreme controller, right? He's the object. He should be the object of sacrifice. But this book, Ishopanishad, goes very deeply into why and who, right? It's part of it. It's this book deals with who is the proprietor of everything. Just like we spend a lot of time in the human society making demarcations. This tract of land, using the latitude and longitude, ... and then moving along this river line, and then you make this cut at this longitudinal division, ... then this side makes the tract of land which is owned by this person, legally bound, this and that. If you see those documents, you can see there's a whole career you can do. It's a surveying, and they do that, and they demarcate this tract is this person's property. And then there's documents, and it's a whole thing. It has to be done properly. The human society loves to do that, making these different places. But who owns all of it? That is actually Krishna. That is actually Vishnu. He's the Parameshvara. Ishopanishad. Isha. He's the real controller. So this book, Ishopanishad, it's one of the Vedas, one of the most ancient Vedas written by Srila Vyasadeva. And he actually describes that everything is owned by Krishna, by Vishnu. Everything. Right? And everybody has a little bit that he lets us use to do our business here in the material world. And that is fair, that is right. Because being children of Krishna, we have a right to use his property, just like our children that we may have, right? If we expected them to make their own money and live off of that, right? Say there's a toddler there. He's 2 or 3 years old. Say, no, you have to make your own money. I'm not going to give you any food. Then actually you'll be punished, right? Because it's only natural. Similarly, it's only natural that we will use the property of Krishna for our needs, but only our quota, only what has been set aside for us, right? Only what has been set aside. So that was discussed later in the verses that the yogis, right? They also sacrifice. So anything extra which comes their way, they use that for the pleasure of the Lord. But the devotee, the point that I was trying to make is that in material society, we're chasing these ideals to accumulate more and more and more. And a pious person thinks, I will accumulate more and more, and I'll do some sacrifice, right? So I'll do some charity, or I'll do some yajna for the demigods, right? Like that, something. But those are all material aims, where essentially we're doing those things to get more material. But the yogi in Krishna consciousness, he says, everything is Krishna's anyway. So I'll use it all for him, whether I'm a rich man or a poor man, whatever I have is his property. So I'll use it for him. Right? So then whatever food he gets, he offers to Krishna. Whatever money he gets, he uses it to worship Krishna. He uses it to support his family and teach them about Krishna. He uses it to donate to the Sankirtan Yajna, to propagate this movement, to share a Bhagavad Gita. Right? This is what we do with our money. We may even, if we're very, very rich, we can build a temple. If we have a lot of good karma and Krishna has arranged that we're getting a lot of wealth, let us use it for Krishna. Let us build some nice temple and have so many people able to come there and see Krishna in the temple, chant arati, pay obeisances, give some flour, give some donation, right? Do some seva, clean something, hear Bhagavad Gita, all these things. Give them an opportunity to make some advancement. So this is the situation. So it was discussed here that certain persons are worshiping the demigods. They're doing a sacrifice for the demigods for material gain. But if we understand that we're just shipwrecked here in this material world, right? If we understand aham brahmasmi, I am not this body, I am spirit, then what do we have to do with more accumulation here in this place? So it's a little philosophical, but at a certain point, he becomes a jnani and he says, what is the point of all this? Let me just lose myself in the Brahman, right? But one who goes millions of births, bahunam janmanam ante, jnanavan mam prapadyate, right? Jnanavan means the possessor of knowledge. He's the real possessor of knowledge. After so many births, Krishna says, mam prapadyate, that he surrenders unto me. Vasudeva sarvamiti samahatma sudurlabha. He's very rare. And he knows that Vasudev, he knows that Krishna is everything. Every single thing is coming from Krishna. Therefore, it's non-different than Krishna. Achintya Beda Beda Tattva. Inconceivable, simultaneous oneness and difference. If everything comes like the light coming from the sun is like the sun rays, we say, hey, look, I see the sun peeking in the window. Last bit of sun is lighting the room. Hey, the sun isn't in here. What are you talking about? It's also the sun. It's the sun's energy. So we know it's non-different, but it's non-different at the same time. It's the same. Similarly, Krishna's energy, everything that we see is Brahman, because it's all coming from Para Brahman, from the Supreme Brahman. So we're meant to recognize that by learning from the bona fide acharyas, from the teachers. When we hear these things from the right source, it changes our heart. If we hear the Vedas from the wrong source, it's like a poison. It's kind of unfortunate, actually. And the real soldiers who are representing Krishna, they don't want people to be making a show of the Vedas. They don't want people to be making some money scheme out of knowledge. That's not very, the real warriors, the real soldiers, transcendental warriors, spiritual warriors, they don't appreciate that behavior. Making cheating in the name of knowledge, because people are so hungry for knowledge. They're waiting for some guidance because confusion is hitting them from every angle. What to do, how to become happy, how to live my life. Then somebody comes in the name of knowledge, in the name of Veda, and he says, yes, do like this. This is it. Then immediately I get into it and I get confused. So we have to be very thankful that we have such a nice source of knowledge. Why do we know? Because when people hear from Srila Prabhupada, from this parampara system, people from all over the planet are turning into even more than Brahmanas. They're doing all the Brahminical culture, living all the nice, pure ways of life, right? And they're completely free from all the modes of nature in the spiritual platform. Now, we're just trying to catch up to those types of people, right? We're trying to run after them and get a little mercy from those types of people. But if we look around this movement, we can see so many of Prabhupada's disciples so pure, you know, so elevated, so one-pointed in yajna, complete dedication to sacrifice for Lord Vishnu. And we can see because of that complete absorption, the complete dedication, they have no worries. They're living in Vaikuntha, even here, without any anxieties, right? So we are trying to learn something. we try to put it into practice, right? We have to chant Hare Krishna. We have to refrain from hearing material sound, and we hear transcendental sound. It begins with hearing from the bona fide teachers. That's what's so nice about these books, is that anybody, no matter where they're at in their consciousness, if they just hear from the liberated souls who are practicing yajna 24/7, bhakti Vedantas, they will be blessed beyond reason. That's called mercy. So we go out, we give these books, we give this mercy, we chant the holy name ourselves, we try to strive more and more to reach Sattva Guna. Then we can have a nice platform to springboard to the Shuddha Sattva Vasudev state. And we'll be blissful. So thank you very much. Maybe we could have some points. Anything? Okay, Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for sharing, Prabhu. You said a lot of good points here. I had a question. You may have already answered it, but I wrote it down and I'll just state it and you can maybe elaborate more. So earlier you were speaking about how there's widespread pollution. You know, there's air pollution and water pollution, and that these are the symptoms of our polluted consciousness. So my question is that, you know, we often hear that a devotee, one who is practicing bhakti, they're always jolly and joyful. But how can one truly be happy living in such a polluted place?
Well, he's happy to bring others to the bright side, you know, from darkness into light. He is experiencing pleasure by giving pleasure to Krishna. So Krishna is pleased, especially when we're giving this knowledge. He states that in Bhagavad Gita and the 18th chapter. He says, nobody else is as dear to me as the person who shares this knowledge with the devotees. So that person who is always blissful knows that I'm on my way back to Godhead and I'm making the best use of my bad bargain. Yes, I'm here in this polluted material world, and I'm here in this material polluted world in the polluted Kali Yuga. And I'm in this Kali Yuga in, polluted XYZ situation. But I never have a check. Nobody can check my ability to serve the Lord, to perform yajna, because I can do it in my mind. I can do it with my tongue. I can do it with my ears, with my eyes, right? I can think of the Lord and I can serve him at any time, right? So there's no check to devotional service. So that's our joy. That's our safeguard. That's our shelter. That we can always perform devotional service no matter what. That means I always have a chance to improve and to give pleasure to Krishna. And that's what it means to be alive. Because we are children of Krishna and we're meant to work for his pleasure. So, thank you so much. Okay. Was it okay? Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees.